Now, our passage today begins at verse number 9. And this passage is actually a prayer that Paul has prayed. Now, remember, in the first two verses, Paul just introduces what he himself and Timothy and goes into a little bit of what he's talking about in this letter. Then he goes on to explain to them how that he is thankful for the obvious work of the gospel, the work that the gospel has done in their lives. And beginning in verse number 9, he is going to tell the Colossian believers how he prays for them. And this prayer is going to be instructive for you and I to know how to pray for others as well, pray for ourselves, but I want to focus on the content of the prayer. Now, obviously, we can learn from what Paul prayed, how we should pray for others, but I want to focus on what Paul is really praying for these believers. So let's begin our reading at verse number 9. He says, "For this cause we also, since the day we heard it," now the "it" is referring back to the work of the gospel that he just talked about in the previous verses. "Since we heard it, do not cease to pray for you." Can I stop there and just say, Paul is not saying to the Colossians that he, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, is praying this prayer just for them. You know, the Bible teaches the principle of praying without ceasing. And all that simply is referring to is a continual attitude of prayer. I've illustrated it for you this way before. Let's say you're on the telephone. Someone has called and you're talking to them on the phone when someone knocks on your door or rings your doorbell. What do you say to the person on the phone? "Could you hold on just a minute?" So you set the phone down or carry it with you nowadays. And you find out who's at the door. If it's a salesman, you slam the door in their face or whatever you want to do, all right? Well, then you go back and you pick up the conversation with the person on the phone. What you have done is you have carried on a conversation without ceasing. Now, there was a little break in the conversation, but you continue it after the break is over. And that's what Paul is saying. He's not saying, "I am praying for you 24/7. He is saying, "I am always in an attitude of prayer." And I think what he's saying is, every time I think of you, this is how I pray for you. Do you understand what comfort that could be for somebody else if you were able to say that to them? I cannot tell you how it would thrill my heart if some of you would say, "You know, Pastor, every time I think of you, I pray for you." I should do the same for you. We should do the same for our missionaries. We should do the same for our children. Every time we think of them, pray for them. So Paul is saying, look, this is what I do. Every time I think about you, I pray for you. And then he says, "And to desire that you might be filled." Now, this is where he starts by explaining to them the specifics of how he's praying. You can break this prayer down into two parts: his petition and his praise. The first part of the prayer here is his petition. And that's where we're focusing on, okay? We're focusing on this first part, the petition. And he says to them, "I do not cease to pray that you would desire to be filled with the knowledge of His will, in all wisdom and spiritual understanding, that you might walk worthy of the Lord unto all pleasing, being fruitful in every good work, and increasing in the knowledge of God, strengthened with all might, according to His glorious power, unto all patience and long-suffering with joyfulness, giving thanks," this is the praise part, "giving thanks unto the Father, which hath made us meet to be partakers of the inheritance of the saints in light." Now we're going to focus on verses 9 through 11. Suppose this week your toddler comes to you and says, "Mom, Dad, you know what? Can I borrow the keys to the car?" And of course, you as a wise and discerning parent are going to ask your toddler, "Why do you need the keys to the car?" And they say, "Well, I just want to take a ride to the store. There's some things that I need. I need some diapers, or some, trying some new food, and go to McDonald's, Happy Meal time, can I have the keys to the car? Now, obviously, you're not going to give them the keys. Because you know that if your toddler gets behind the wheel, someone's going to get hurt. All right, well, let's talk about it. Let's think of another example. For those of you who fly, say the next flight that you take, you're boarding the airplane and suddenly you get this brilliant idea that you want to help the pilot. So you, as you're boarding, stop by the cockpit and you go in and you say, sir, you know what, I realize you work long hours and you probably already had several flights today. Let me do this for you. Let me fly the plane. You go somewhere, kick back, take a nap, get some rest. Let me do this for you. I want to help. Now your intentions are good. And you mean well, but you don't know what you're doing. You don't know how to fly a plane. In both of those illustrations, the point is this. Someone's going to get hurt because the wrong person's in control. If your toddler gets the keys, and if you get in that pilot's seat, someone is going to get hurt because the wrong person would be in control. What Paul is praying for these believers is that the right person would be in control of their lives. If you want to reach the destination of your life successfully, joyfully, then the right person has to be in control. If we want to reach the end of our journey and be able to say, like Paul said, I have fought a good fight, I have finished my course, I have kept the faith. If we want to be able to end the Christian life joyfully and successfully, and I'm using success in the spiritual sense of that term, then the right person has to be in control. We are not going to be able to have a Frank Sinatra philosophy of life. I did it my way kind of thing. We are going to need God to be in complete control. And Paul is praying in his petition for the Colossian believers that they would let God control their lives. First of all, in this text, let's look at the request. Beginning there with that phrase that Paul says that ye might be filled with the knowledge of his will. I want to focus on the word filled. And this is probably as far as we'll get this morning. Just on that one word, filled. And what he is meaning by that. The word filled is used three different ways, I believe, in Paul's prayer here. First of all, it has the idea of being consumed. It also, it has the idea, the consuming, it has the idea of being full to the point that nothing else will fit in. You know what it's like before the days of leaf blowers, and maybe some of us who don't have those still understand this. You remember what it was like to go through your yard, rake those leaves up, pick the leaves up, and put them in a whatever kind of bag you were going to put them in. And you would rake your piles in your different places, and you would drag that bag behind you, and then you'd put those leaves into that bag, and you would think that it was as filled as it possibly could be. But if you would then take it and shake it and stomp on it a little bit, stomp on those leaves, smash them down a little bit, you could go to the next pile and get it a little bit more. It would look full. Then you'd do the same thing. Shake it, mash it down, stomp on it a little bit on the leaves, and then you'd go to the next pile, do the same thing. You are cramming that thing full to the point that nothing else is going to fit in. That is one of the things that Paul is praying for.